Welcome back to Speak Out with Christine Jurgen. I'm your host, Christine Jurgen, and today's episode is one that's going to be really special because this guest right now is exploding all over social media, and we were able to grab him for an episode. It was kind of hard to work with his schedule, but we nailed it down and it worked, and he worked with me on my schedule, my mom's stuff that I had going on, which was very kind of him. But we have Zuby today. He's an independent rapper. He's a speaker. He's an author. He does fitness. He's a social media content creator and commentator. He's an entrepreneur. He does pretty much everything. And I have him introduce himself so he can kind of explain to you all of what he does. But he's somebody who's lived all over the world, who's got a very well-rounded view. I love following him on social media. I can't tell you how much I enjoy following him. He's very articulate in the stuff that he says and insightful. There's a lot of times where people do this like gotcha posting on social media and they're trying to just come at the other side really hardcore. And I think there's a time and a place for that. But he lays out his opinions and what he thinks so insightfully. And I just really enjoy the way that he says things and the way that he shares his thoughts to the public. So I think you guys are going to like him. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been on BBC. He's been on the Ben Shapiro show, Candace Owens, kind of all over the place, and is really exploding 1.5 million followers across social media platforms. So I'm excited we snagged him, and I'm excited you guys get to hear from him. So let's jump into it. Okay, Zuby, you are a rapper. You have a podcast. You also have a book about fitness, a massive social media following. You kind of are all over the place doing a little bit of everything. For anyone who asks you or you introduce yourself and they say, what do you do? Go ahead and explain it for us, for anybody who might be new to learning about you on the podcast today.
Yeah, sure. So career-wise, I am an independent rapper, author of 2 books. I am the host of the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. I'm a public speaker who does stuff internationally, I can say at this stage. And I also am a coach as well. I do social media coaching, fitness coaching, aspects of life coaching. Those are the big 5 of what I do. It all started out with just the music. I used to be able to simply say that I'm just a rapper. And then in 2019, I started adding some additional strings to the bow. And now I'm known by a lot of people for a lot of different things.
I found you on Twitter, which is where a lot of people find you because you have such a huge following there. And you're very insightful with the things that you tweet. You're very succinct with what you say, and it always is on point. And I was looking at something that you said on Twitter. You said that I think it was in 2020, you tweeted about your pro-life beliefs, and you said that you lost 3,500 followers, which you probably had a little bit of a smaller account then, which 3,500 followers now is like just, a drop in the bucket, not that big of a deal because you're almost at 1 million followers now just on Twitter alone. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to hear what it is that made you pro-life, or when you realized you were pro-life, and how you kind of came to terms with the fact that you value preborn babies.
Yeah, sure thing. So I would say that for my life, certainly from when I was old enough to have a concept of how biology works and how babies are made, and, learning actually what an abortion is and so on and so forth, I'd say I've never liked the idea. I've never liked the idea of abortion, even when I was, say in my early teens, I guess, is when I first would have heard about the concept of it. And as a sort of natural emotion, not emotional, just like a emotional / logical / ethical / moral perspective, I was always like, well, it's clear what is happening there. And I had a natural aversion to that. I'd almost argue you probably have to be brainwashed into not having one. And so, but I never thought deeply about the issue. I never had a need or reason to from my own personal perspective or life or anything. And then when I got into my late 20s or early 30s, I think the thing that made me think about it a bit more was actually some of the conversations that were going on in the wider public, particularly in the USA. It's not an issue that's talked about much in the UK. It's not like a culture war issue in the UK or in much of Europe as it is in the USA. It sort of stays out of the socio-political arena. You'd never hear a British politician really talking about this issue, for example, whereas in the USA, regardless of what side of the issue they're on, it's a massive subject. It's a big topic. You have discussions about Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood and this and that. UK, it's just kind of like, it's just people don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think some of those conversations that were happening, I think at the time, maybe, I can't even remember what it was that spurred the conversation, but I remember there being a day and some conversations I'd had both online and offline, which made me just go, you know what, let me really look into this issue and let me get some facts, right? Like, let me get the facts. Let me look back into the development of a child from, the sperm meeting an egg through the development cycle. What exactly is an embryo? What is a blastocyst? What is a fetus? What is a baby, right? Going back through the entire process and also learning, okay, what even is an abortion? There's some people there saying, either this is not a human life, or this is not a baby, or this is just a fetus, or abortion isn't killing anything because it's not a life, and this is what happens, or that's what happened. There's just all these different, oftentimes highly uninformed, highly emotional takes running around there, and I don't really operate on that level. I'm not a very emotional person. And so I was just like, let me just find out what the facts are. Let me really look into this. No bias. Let me just look at the details here. And I did that. I thought, okay, how does this work in the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester? What are the situations? What are the different perspectives? And let me listen to people and talk to people from different sides of this argument, right? Let me listen to the best. I'm not interested in hearing the dumbest arguments. I'm interested in hearing the good arguments, right? Let me listen to good, well-informed, smart arguments on both sides of this issue. And when I did that, and when I just had more data and information, it made me strongly pro-life. I was already naturally leaning that way, as I said, for the past couple of decades, just from not even really thinking about it. But I'd always had I don't like that idea. Yeah, it's definitely killing a baby. What exactly is the morality? What should be the law? I don't know. I just assume that I live in a developed country, so whatever people have worked out all these decades before I was even alive, like, it's probably right. They're somewhat right about most things. So when it comes to the law, so I just assumed it was right. And then I was like, okay, I mean, I'd say it took me a couple hours. Once I'd had more info, it took me kind of a couple hours, but I guess this is the culmination of a much longer time to become, look, this is maybe the best way to sum it up, Christine, is I think that in order to not be pro-life, I'm not even going to label people's other positions because people are going to call themselves what they want. But in order to support abortion, I'd say at least ethically, you either have to accept that sometimes it's okay to end an innocent and defenseless human life intentionally, or you have to deny the human life. You either, and you see both of these, right? So either you have people who deny the humanity of the unborn child and will claim, oh, it's not a human being, or it's not alive, or it's just this, or it's just that. And that's dishonest. From a biological and logical perspective, it's dishonest, right? So that one for me, I'm like, okay, well, I can't support that because I can lie to people, I can lie to myself, but that's just not true, right? It's clearly human because it's not any other species, and everything is either alive, dead, or inanimate. Mm-hmm. And it's a life, right? If I were to rewind my own life, all of us, that's how we all started. Right? Like, if we were to hit the rewind button on any of our lives, that's where we start. So I was like, okay, well, that is a human life with potential, not a potential human life. That is a human life, even if it's small and can't defend itself and so on. And then the second position is, okay, if you accept that, which an honest person will, and which an honest person, even on the other side of the argument, typically would, then the next point is, okay, is it sometimes okay to intentionally kill an innocent human life primarily out of convenience, if we're being honest. Is that okay? Just as a general ethical position. And with my moral framework, which I accept is different from some other people's, it's a hard no, right?
Yeah.
In any situation, it's like, okay, is it okay to intentionally terminate an innocent human life? Is it okay to intentionally take away a life? We're not talking accidents. We're not talking self-defense. We're not even talking people being at war. We're talking about there's no threat being posed here. And it to me, the answer is no. And so therefore, based off of those two heuristics, shall I say, I was like, yeah, I can't support this. In fact, I think this is an atrocity. I think this is a tragedy. I think this is something really wrong that has been going on for decades and has been normalized in society and couched in certain euphemism and language to make it sound appealing to people. In fact, to make it sound like some sort of moral or ethical good and something positive and something that's just about freedom and safety and women's rights and liberty and kindness,
with words,
even,
aren't they?
and care, right? It's all couched in these euphemisms. But when you get away from the euphemisms and you just deal with reality and you stop playing the language games, I'm like, well, this is what it is. And, you know, if someone accepts that and is like, okay, that's what they want to support, then okay. But for me personally, I was like, yeah, that's not my position. And based off of that, that's why I would call myself pro-life. Like I said, I'd say I've always sort of been there for a long time, but didn't dive any deep into it. Certainly publicly never stated my position on it because, you know, I guess 10 years ago, if someone publicly asked me my position, I probably would have been like, I don't really like the idea, but I also haven't thought deeply about it. So I don't really know. I have an aversion, but me having an aversion, is that a strong position? But yeah, now I can articulate, and I'm happy to voice that publicly, whether or not people appreciate it or share my view.
I love that. You make a good point because they do use euphemisms, and children, and I would assume this kind of, you know, as a young teen, I still consider that a child, but children are inherently pro-life. They look at an ultrasound and they see a baby and they will tell you that it's a baby. And they, you know, my daughters, I would show them like little ultrasounds of them when they were younger and they'd be like, oh, cute baby. Like that just is naturally in them. And you have to manipulate them to think that it's okay to kill a baby. That's where all of these euphemisms come in, you know, my body, my choice, or women's rights, or no uterus, no opinion when it comes to you because you don't have a uterus, or, you know, all of the things that they say. It sounds good. It's emotional, which is why your logic is making you say, what does no uterus, no opinion mean? What does my body, my choice actually mean? Let's dive into this a little bit more. You said something about being in the UK. You've lived in the UK. You've lived in the Middle East before. Give us a very brief background on where you've lived. But I asked that question specifically because I'm curious how different the abortion issue is viewed in the Middle East and even the United Kingdom to America, because we are one of the most I would say regressive, but it's progressive countries when it comes to the issue of abortion. We're one of the most extreme countries, you know, similar to China and North Korea, which are not countries I'd like to be similar to. But I'm interested in the countries that you have lived in. How do you see the difference, especially as it pertains to the Middle East?
Yeah, sure. Before I answer that, there's something you said there which is really interesting when you were talking about the baby scans and people's natural emotional reactions. Everyone has those reactions. Even people who support abortion or call themselves pro-choice, they still have those same reactions, just like they have the same reactions if there's a miscarriage, just like they go to baby showers but not fetus showers. No one ever asks a pregnant woman how her fetus or how her embryo is doing. They'll ask her how her baby is doing, when is the baby due, so on and so forth. So even just in the language that people use, even that is not consistent. And I think it's important for that to be brought up because people are playing some sort of weird mind games there. Yeah, but to answer the question, so in terms of my background, so I was born in England. I was raised in Saudi Arabia. I went to school there from kindergarten up until fifth grade. And then I went to boarding school in the UK from the age of 11. My family background is originally from Nigeria. And I, of course, went to both American and British schools. So yeah, I've
Lots of influences going on there.
yeah, lots of influence, a bit of an odd life. In this particular issue, as it pertains to the Middle East, it's a good question. The honest answer is I don't really know. I would certainly say that those cultures, both in the Middle East and certainly in Nigeria and across Africa, are more pro-life in the way that we view it, if you want to use that term. I would certainly also say that in the Middle East, and I know that, stuff happens everywhere. Humans are going to be humans, but I think it's less of an issue because, look, if we're talking about abortion and we're talking about unwanted pregnancies and we're talking about, all these things, there's an upstream here, right? There's an upstream in terms of society and culture and human behavior, right? Pregnancies don't happen out of nowhere. There's something that has happened upstream in order for us to even be having these conversations. The reason this is such a huge conversation in countries like the USA and why it's an issue in Europe and, the UK, Canada, etc., is because we live in a weird, very weird sexual climate, right? We live in this age where everything from hookup culture to having a whole bunch of baby mamas and baby daddies and broken families and divorces and teens having sex and this and that and everything goes. We live in this society where, the only sin is non-consensual activity. And, you're not meant to judge or say anything about anything. And, everyone's supposed to celebrate. We literally, our culture celebrates sexuality all the time, implicitly and explicitly. Yeah. And so as a result of that, if you promote that and you encourage that and you normalize it and it goes to the excesses, which we're really living through right now, then of course this is going to become a question downstream because you can't perfectly separate sex from reproduction, nor would a society want to. But we're sort of pretending that we can. And the reason why this issue is so heated up and polarized, I think, is largely because people don't want to be responsible for their actions, right? And people are going to want to jump to 1% and 2% cases to try to justify the other 98 and 99. But that's what we're dealing with. I think we're dealing with a massive level of immaturity. I think we're dealing with a degenerate sexual climate where people are, on one hand, people want to be treated like adults, but on the other hand, they want to be completely absolved of all responsibility and error and poor judgment and so on. And if there's a human life in the way of that needs to be terminated, then, so be it. That's really people's position. When people are screaming, my body, my choice, my body, my choice. I mean, it's rights come with responsibilities, right? So in theory, in a free society, I mean, we have the right to largely do what we want. I have the right to go out and knock up 100 women if I so choose to, right? There's no right against, but if I'm out there screaming my body, my choice, and I'm behaving like that, like, am I being responsible? I would argue not. Am I being ethical? Am I being moral? I would argue not. So if I'm there just screaming about my rights, then I'm somewhat missing the point. So I think that coming back to the original question, so I think that in the Middle East, of course, these are much more conservative cultures and societies. These are places where, sexual activity from a religious and a social and a cultural and even a legal standpoint is more, there are more standards and even rules, whether those are laws or not. Not everything is a law, but there's, just like that used to exist in the USA, that used to exist in the UK. It's only in very recent times where all of this stuff has changed and eroded and become inverted. So I think for them, it's not such a huge issue, right? People get married and they stay married and they have their children and so on. Does stuff go on behind closed doors? Yes, absolutely, right? We're talking about human beings. I'm sure that it does, but it's a very different culture and society and system over there. And there are absolutely things that some people may criticize in relation to that, right? Certain elements can certainly go too far, especially in certain parts of the Middle East, right? It's not even good to talk about the whole region as a whole because all those countries are different, just like countries in the West are not all the same. But I would also say that in the West, we've overcorrected in the other direction. And it seems like human beings in general struggle to strike a balance between what we could call liberalism and conservatism. And you can see the results of the excesses of both of those things across the world and all throughout human history. So I know that in much of Africa, the laws are certainly more pro-life. Also, the cultural attitudes lean much more pro-life across the board, by the way. When I say pro-life, I'm not just talking about the abortion issue. I'm talking about people's approach to family. I'm talking about people's approach to human life in general, and it being sacred and it being a gift from God, and children truly being a blessing, not some, not oh, the world is overpopulated and let's not reproduce. Human beings are this play, like
Right.
that
My
whole
career comes before my child.
that whole attitude is a very modern Western attitude. That's not the way it's viewed in much of the world. So I would say that overall the culture is a lot more pro-life, and that is reflected throughout the society. Of course, there are people trying to push to change that, both internally and externally. There's a lot of Western nations exerting pressure, particularly on African countries, to try to change that. You have Planned Parenthood International, you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you have these other foundations, some of them, which are, that's a whole other topic. If people are interested in that, they should read a book called Target Africa, which is very interesting on that topic. It's about ideological colonization and how the Western entities are trying to export certain ideas into Africa and force them on people who do not want them. So that's a whole issue in itself.
Africa's always the guinea pig, right?
Yeah,
They
it
target
is.
Africa and experiment and do all kinds of things. And
yeah, it is. And most people aren't aware of it, right? People only like to, Africa's the biggest continent in the world. And it's got 54 countries in it, I believe. And people only like to talk about it in the media here when they have a very certain angle or narrative and when it's beneficial and it's conducive to them. But outside of that, they sort of pretend that Africa doesn't exist, which is always sort of funny.
You mean the media has a narrative that they like to keep to? No way.
Just a conspiracy theory.
So I want to dive a little bit into like the music industry world, because that's something that you have been in. You're a rapper. You've been around a lot of different musicians. When it comes to rap as a whole, it's no secret that a lot of it is about sex. A lot of it is about drugs. A lot of it is about promiscuous activity and being violent, and I'm speaking generally for what you turn on the radio or, some of the most famous rappers that we hear. It's not stuff that I would want my kids to listen to necessarily. And when you're promoting this hookup culture, this sex culture, women as objects, and I say that in the most non-feminist way. I feel weird even just saying that because it makes me feel a little bit like a feminist. I'm like, oh no. But really that's what rap does a lot of times, is push these things that then encourage people to be even more sexual or participate in hookup culture as if it's cool. And then it ends up with us over here in the pro-life movement. Have you seen stuff like behind the scenes where, somebody gets pregnant, it's like, okay, whatever, just have an abortion, or, I'm going to pay them off. We've seen that with celebrities. We've seen it with athletes, I'm sure, rappers and whatnot. But it's this whole scene that kind of promotes hookup culture where it ends up harming young people. I'm curious if you could give us a little like behind the scenes stuff that you've seen or observed where you're like, no, that's not cool. And when you do observe stuff like that, do you call them up to be better people?
I hear that. So first of all, I think it's important for people to recognize that I don't consider myself part of the music industry, and I never have. I've always operated independently, and I've always operated outside of the big machines. Right. Yeah. So I've always been self-managed. I've always acted as my own agent. I started my own record label when I was a teenager to put out my very first release, and I've done everything independent so far. So I'm not in those rooms and behind those closed doors at the labels. I've talked to people who are, and I've heard certain stories and things like that. But I would say that when it comes to this issue in particular, I don't know if rap in particular is even the specific culprit compared to just all the popular music
Oh no,
that's out
yeah,
there.
absolutely.
When it comes to things like, I don't know, violence or rapping about drug dealing or something, then sure, I'd say that, gang activity, I'd say that, yeah, rap is a bigger culprit, particularly a lot of the mainstream stuff. But I think when it comes to just, I mean, even if you look at the female pop singers these days, and I mean, it's funny because people used to really talk about male rappers from this perspective. I remember in the 90s and in the early 2000s, it was always like, these rappers, these male rappers, and the women they're having in the videos, and they're saying, I now watch music videos from whether it's female rappers or female pop singers or what, and they're way more.
You
They're
got a
more
point.
explicit.
You
They're
have
more
input.
explicit
Yeah.
than the rap videos from 20 years ago and so on. And I'm just like, wow, that's so interesting, right? It used to be, yeah, women saying they don't want to be objectified and so on, and then that's their videos. I mean, if you watch whether it's an Ariana Grande video or it's Nicki Minaj or it's Cardi B or it's even these people like Selena Gomez and these more sort of teen pop based, like people
Swift.
have these teenage and preteen audiences, it's all gotten pretty sexual and explicit. And yeah, I mean, even if you see the performances that they're doing at some of these award shows, I mean, the whole Christina Aguilera thing, and then was Miley Cyrus, and I don't know. I think the music industry as a whole, the mainstream music industry,
Everything
is
as a whole
certainly,
these days.
is certainly pushing a lot of this. I wonder if music is always an interesting one for me because I think it simultaneously reflects and informs society and culture. Right? So it's both of them. And it's also, I get asked a lot as a rapper, oh, what do you think about rappers making X type of music or doing this or doing that? And I'm like, look, that's all, we all have to take responsibility and accountability for our own words and our actions. But to me, a bigger question is, why do so many people like it? Why is that what people are buying and streaming and supporting? Those are the concerts that they're going to. There's a lot of wholesome, positive, non-degenerate music that is out there of all genres, right?
Yeah.
So why is it, I mean, go look at the Billboard top 10 or top 20 or whatever. Why is it that the most streamed songs or the most popular albums and artists or whatever, that's what they're talking about and people are buying it? It's like, if what's the most famous what's the most popular, successful restaurant in the world? McDonald's.
Yeah.
McDonald's. Does McDonald's make the best food? No, but am I mad at McDonald's? I'm like, no, McDonald's they're a business, right? They're
making money.
feeding people what they want. My question is like, man, why are billions of people around the world buying? I haven't eaten McDonald's in 20 years. All right. I don't even want to eat it, but billions of people do. So my question is like, man, why does everyone want McDonald's? Yeah.
Yeah, I had that reaction because literally I was just thinking as you're saying this out loud. I was at my son's football game this past weekend, which got them into, they're in the semifinals and then the state championship, hopefully. And they're playing music in between the plays and they have the band there, but then there's also like music coming over the intercom, and everything that got me dancing, with the exception of like a Justin Bieber song that came on, was like rap music, that they played rap music. And I'm sitting there, like little old millennial white mom, just like dancing to this rap music. And you say that, you're like, well, the better question is, why are people buying this stuff and listening to this? And I'm like, dang, now I'm convicted because I was dancing to this stuff. And here I am saying that, it eventually contributes to us over here in the pro-life movement because we have a more sexualized culture. And I know it's not just rap music, obviously. It's everything. It's social media, it's big tech, it's everything that's pushed on us is sexualized. I don't know if you saw what happened with Balenciaga today. I think it was today that they posted some stuff with kids in like bondage type clothing. Weird ads. It's been all over social media today. It's wild. It's some new marketing thing they have going on, and it's like the kids aren't in bondage clothing. Let me rephrase. They're holding little teddy bears that are like in bondage clothing. It's disturbing. So it's pushed from a very young age and the whole culture is sexualized. But you said that and I was like, dang, that was That's me.
By the way, it's me too. It's me too, right? I mean, for the past 20 years, I've been listening to all sorts of degenerate rap music. I'm not sitting here pretending that I myself don't listen to or consume any of this. That would be an absolute lie. I would also say that I think as I said, I think that the music is a reflection of us. I think art in general is a reflection of where a society and a culture are. It helps to shape it for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that if we lived in a time and a climate where values were more conservative, to use a broad term, then this stuff wouldn't be, number one, I don't think there would be as much of it. Number two, I don't think there would be as much demand. And number three, I don't think it would be so influential on people. So I can be here and say, yeah, I listen to, I watch, when it comes to entertainment, music, movies, video games, like I watch listen to a lot of stuff that would be considered objectionable. It's certainly not conservative. It's certainly not Christian. But I was raised really well. I've got fantastic parents. I'm from a great family. I was raised with good values. I know right from wrong. I can separate reality from entertainment. So I can go play a video game where I'm blowing people's limbs and heads off for, hours on end, or listening to some crazy rap music. I don't even swear. I don't even cuss. I don't even use profanity. I've heard all of this stuff, but it doesn't affect my behavior because I put it's squarely in an entertainment box. And I'm not the only one like that, right? I'm sure you could listen to what
Yellowstone is one of the most popular shows right now. And there's murder in it, there's sex in it, there's drugs in it. And, a lot of conservatives are like, it's a conservative show. And I'm like, in what world is this a conservative show? Are you kidding me? So
but
we all do it.
Yeah, we all do. And I don't think that, I think there would be look, let me sum it up this way. I think that if your child is being more influenced by some rapper or pop singer or video game or whatever, then they're being influenced by you as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? Then I'd say that, again, upstream, there's an issue there. There's an issue there. I think a much bigger issue, if people want to talk about rap and entertainment and all that low hanging fruit, to me, the big issue is, all right, let's talk about fatherless homes. Let's talk about broken family. Let's talk about the denigration of marriage. Let's talk about adults. As adults, let's talk about, what are the adults modeling for children, right? Mm-hmm. Not just the entertainers, but people as a whole. I think those are the uncomfortable conversations because it means turning the mirror inward, and in some way, it can sound like you're implicating millions and millions of people because millions and millions of people now come from that. I mean, I think in the entire world, doesn't the USA have the highest rate of children born out of wedlock in the whole world? Like that's not
and divorce too.
Yeah, I mean,
very high rate.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, the USA is a wonderful country in many regards, but that's not a statistic you want to be number one in. And it's one thing for that to happen, but it's another thing to almost like deny, like fail to even acknowledge it, not even go, okay, wait, this is an issue, right? This is a problem. This is something that's trending not in a good direction. We can see the impact. At this point, we have data, we have statistics. You can see, okay, if a boy or a girl grows up without a father in their life, we have statistics. Does that mean that every single child who doesn't have a father or is going to be, no, it's not saying all that stuff, right? People can get out of their personal emotions for a moment. Right? But if we're looking at a whole society, if you're looking across hundreds of millions of people, then we know that fathers matter. We know that people are impacted we know children are impacted by divorces or by parents not being absent and, by parents not being present and so on and so forth. And we can pretend that this stuff doesn't matter and we can act like, oh, okay, let's avoid that and let's avoid that and let's avoid that. And I'm like, look, these are the real issues, and that's leading to a lot of downstream problems. We've touched on the abortion issue. That's one of many. This impacts criminality, education, poverty, mental health, physical well-being, the probability that child is going to go on and repeat certain negative bad patterns, all of these things. And it matters. I mean, to his credit, Barack Obama, when he was president or going to be president, I remember a speech where he very explicitly talked about the importance of fathers, right? And he even gave certain statistics and was saying, look, if a child doesn't have a father in their life, they're this time's more likely to end up in prison, this time's more likely to end up in poverty, and so he was talking about that, right? People were talking about the family. And now I don't know if it's just because it makes people emotionally uncomfortable that people don't really want to have those conversations. And certainly politicians shy away from it because they don't want to feel like they're implicating or, how would I say this? They don't want to be like offending any potential voters or anything like that. But I think as long as we just pretend that none of this stuff matters, then all of those things are going to keep sliding and degrading. And, at some point, if it keeps going that way in another couple decades, people are going to look up and be like, oh my gosh, like we've completely lost our society and culture. What's even going on here? Some people are feeling that way already, but without some type of reversal, it'll get worse.
It will. And you say such great things there. Men are so incredibly important and fathers are so incredibly important. I was naive. I had my own unplanned pregnancy and I chose to be responsible after making stupid choices that I shouldn't have been making. And if I could go back now, I'd probably do the same exact thing because I love my son with all my heart. And I would I would never take him back for anything in the world. But I was naive in thinking that if his dad didn't come around, and eventually he did, and is very involved in his life now, I was like, it's fine. I can love you enough for the both of us. And that's not true. Men have a very important role. God's design for marriage and family is very intentional, and men really need to step up. There's a lot, women too. I'm not absolving women of any responsibilities that they have, but men hold a lot of influence in ways that I don't know that they even realize when it comes to their children, but also when it comes to women. 75%, I don't know if it's quite 75%, but roughly around there, people who have had abortions say that they felt pressured by someone else. And typically that's a man. And oftentimes, of course the parent can maybe influence, but that's going to be much less than actually the boyfriend or the husband who is influencing in those ways. And I recently did a baby registry for a mom on social media who chose life, but she went into Planned Parenthood unsure of what she was going to decide. The boyfriend wanted to do the abortion. And so she went in and then eventually chose to take the pill and have an abortion. Fortunately, they both decided that they regretted it. She didn't say anything. She immediately regretted it inside, didn't say anything. And then they were back home and they're young. They're like 19. And so this is, even at 19, men and young men and boys have this influence over women. They're laying down after she took the first pill. And he said, "Are you sure you don't want to keep the baby?" After telling her he wanted her to have the abortion. And she immediately perked up and was like, I've been regretting this. I want to reverse this. And they found the abortion pill reversal, searching online, and were able to reverse the abortion. But I say all of that to say, even at 19, these young men are having influences on women. And I think if men were more responsible in so many ways, young women too. First of all, they shouldn't have been having sex. We'll just say that. You save that for marriage. But I don't think men realize how valuable they are. And we live in a culture where they're demonized, or, women have to be better than men, or, to be equal, we tear men down. And that's the whole feminist way, and why I even cringed at kind of sounding like a feminist earlier. But men are so incredibly important. I want to hear from you, from your male perspective, as somebody who's not necessarily in this movement, because my whole world is biased because I live and work in this movement. What role do you think men can play in improving the culture when it comes to this issue, and where they can fit in the pro-life movement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, you've said so much stuff there that's interesting. But to answer your question, I think men are at least 50% of the issue by definition, right? We're 50%. We're 50% of the population. We're 50% of the mating process. We are, when it comes to the way that the laws and certain things are laid out and viewed, and even aspects of biology, right? Of course, we know that, this is even considered a women's issue because, of course, it's women who carry babies, it's women who deliver babies, it's women who breastfeed, and so on. It'd be silly to, pretend that's not the case. But I totally agree with you that both, I'll tell you what I think. I think that both men underestimate their value and their influence on women. And I also would argue that women underestimate their value and underestimate their influence on men massively. And I think it's so funny that in the West, in these modern times, there's always these debates about, almost like, is it the men at fault or is it the women at fault? Is it this one or is it that one? And I'm always just like, it's both. It's both, right? Because there are people who want to blame women for everything and put all the onus on women and sort of absolve men of the responsibility and of our participation. And then on the flip side, the more feminist narratives who want to blame men on like everything, right? Like as if women have no agency, women have no influence, as if, they're saying at one point, women are strong and independent and whatever, but apparently also they cannot make decisions and they can be influenced by, and it's like, well, you can't have both of those. How about if you're an adult, you're responsible and you're accountable for your decisions. You have free will and the ability to make your own choices, which have downstream effects and repercussions. If you're, again, talking about balancing rights with responsibilities. Yes, you have a right to do X, but you also have a responsibility, right? Not just legally, we're also talking morally, ethically, both for yourself and for society and for everyone involved. And when you're talking about something as special and intimate and unique about potentially bringing other human beings into the world, we can't be just thinking selfishly on these things, right? You've got at least 3 people involved in all of these scenarios.
Yep.
At least, right? At least 3 people are involved. So we can't keep pretending like it's just one person. We can't even pretend that it's just 2 people, right? There's at least 3 people who are involved in all of these scenarios. And I wish that we could just get to a point of maturity where we were hearing these type of conversations more. No politician is ever going to have this conversation, on publicly. It's all going to just be about, okay, the end result. And that's where everyone gets stuck. And that's where the whole argument is and where the debate is. But I think if we could go up a level, not only would it be less polarizing, but also I think we'd find some real proper solutions, right? We'd find some real proper solutions. We'd be able to change people's hearts, change people's minds slowly. And I think shift the society and culture overall in a more healthy direction. Because to me, a lot of the abortion debate from many angles, oftentimes to me, it's like a symptom of a degenerating society and degenerating morals and degenerating values, degenerating family, right? It's more of a symptom than a cause. So I think that there's a lot of stuff upstream that needs to be discussed in a very mature fashion. Yes, of course, you want to debate that issue, the issue we started with as well. But it can be a frustrating conversation because, not with you, just widely. Sure. And I'm sure you've had this experience as well, because
all the time. So
because people, it gets really lost in the weeds. And I think sometimes people on both sides of the issue even can lose track of, okay, like, what are we even trying to achieve here? What are we aiming towards? What are we aiming towards? Because I think people, regardless of how they feel about the abortion issue, ethically, morally, legally, I would hope that, certainly all decent people would like that number to go down, right? I've never met someone who wants more, who thinks there should be, wants more abortions generally happening, or, well, maybe people involved in it maybe people who can profit. Okay. But sure. I'd say even those people at your events, they're 1%. They're not even 1% of the population, right? Someone who's going to come out and protest you and be screaming with a sign, they're by definition way, way, way over there, right? Most people 99% of people, and 1% of people in a big country is still a significant number, but vast majority of people are like, we don't want more of that, and we would actually like more children to come into the world wanted, right? I do think everyone would agree on that, right? We want more. We don't want situations where, children feel like they're unwanted or parents. So I think even though it's one of those issues where it can seem very difficult to find common ground, I do think that common ground can be found. And actually, if you start at the beginning, if you start a little more upstream rather than starting right at the end point, then you can find some elements of common ground. And then I think once you know that, number one, people are less likely to attack and demonize the other or to false frame, straw man the other opinion. Because I know a lot of people on the pro-life side would like to think that pro-choice people just, hate babies or love abortion or want people to, right? Just like people on the pro-choice side would love to believe that, oh, pro-lifers don't actually care about babies. They don't care about life. They're just pro-birth and they're anti-women. They just hate women and want to control their bodies. There's this straw manning that goes on both ways, which is not helpful or honest, I would say, because I've spoken to people and I know that's, again, with rare exceptions, that's general. I've never met someone who's pro-life whose position is I just want to control women.
It is the way they're moving, though. It is, Planned Parenthood has gone from, their CEO has gone from saying, we're not pro-choice, we're pro-abortion.
Yes.
And it's gone from safe, legal, and rare to on-demand, without apology, all 9 months of pregnancy. So there is this shift where it's not as much, they're kind of making it seem like you're just putting a Band-Aid on a scrape on your knee, where it's not even, but I guess it kind of goes into what we were saying before too, with the euphemisms and the manipulation. When you don't think that it's a baby, you don't even really know what a pregnancy is because you think it's, just a clump of cells. You're not actually killing a baby. It's not actually a human. So it's easy, I think, for them to be pro-abortion versus pro-choice and, actually supporting both choices, because they don't even think it's a baby or a human.
Can I jump in? I don't think that's even true. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true that they don't think it's a baby. They know exactly what it is. They're the ones doing it.
I think there are people who do, for sure.
If you're talking about Planned Parenthood know exactly what they're doing.
Yes. Abortionists for sure. Clinic workers for sure. I'm talking about what they're teaching in comprehensive sex ed today. Okay. A 16, 17-year-old, I talked to these young girls and they're like, at 20 weeks, it's a clump of cells. And I said, a baby at 21 weeks has survived being born, gone to the NICU and is alive today, very young still, but they don't really understand what it is. And it's because they're being lied to. I actually did an episode earlier this morning that's going to come out with somebody who was a comprehensive sex ed teacher for 10 years and dives into kind of what they're teaching, how they're manipulating kids, how they're getting them more sexual, how they're lying about, they don't even tell you the development of a baby at all, or talk about the pregnancy. It's just, have safe sex. And then if you get pregnant, you have an abortion. And it's kind of this, cycle that she was talking about, and, safe sex. And, obviously 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds shouldn't be having sex, period. But I'd say there's almost this culture shift because we're lying and we're manipulating people, to especially young kids, to believe that there is no actual baby. It's not even a human. There is no heartbeat. Stacey Abrams says it's a manufactured sound, all of these things. But there is definitely some of the, on both sides. I will say my view is probably a little bit more biased than other people because I do see the extreme a lot.
You do.
I do also see people who are very in the middle, and, most people will talk to me about this pretty calm and collected, but then there's definitely the extremes that you see. And there is a demonization, but I think it's important to know, especially as pro-lifers, is most people who are pro-choice, they genuinely think they're helping women.
I know.
Like they're coming from a decent place. They think they're helping.
Agreed. And this is why I'm cautious in my rhetoric not to try to paint everyone who has a different position on this as, I don't think it's helpful when people do you just want to kill babies, or you're just this, or as soon as it descends into that from either side, the conversation's kind of over. You're not gonna reach people by, even if you genuinely feel that way, just like people who are, in favor of abortion are not going to change anyone's mind by claiming, you hate women and you just want to control their bodies and this, and it's like, It's such a straw man, and it's so dishonest that you're not dealing with an honest actor. And the principle of charity can be very difficult. And I think particularly, I don't think there's an issue where it's harder to apply it, in fact, because people feel so viscerally and strongly and emotionally about anything pertaining to human rights or human rights, human life, We're talking about human life here. And then
Yeah.
you're mixing it with a framing of a women's issue, and then you're mixing it with sex and so on. It's just this landmine of emotionality. So yeah, the conversations can be, they can be very difficult, but ultimately with me, the way I approach everything, not just this topic, is I often think about, okay, well, what's actually helpful? You know, not just what's going to give me a dopamine hit, or what's going to make me look like, oh, look at me dunking on someone of a different opinion. Let me go out and own the libs. Let me do this. Right. It's more like, okay, what's my goal here? Right. What's my goal? Why am I even talking about this? I think this is an important issue. We are talking about human life and death. We are talking about protecting human life. We are trying to shift people's hearts and beliefs and ethics. You're trying to educate people so that, first of all, they actually have the proper facts and information. And if you're going to do that, then you do have the delivery does matter, right? The delivery does matter. Trying to reach people where they are does matter. Trying to properly understand people's individual positions without straw manning them or without being emotionally manipulative. All that stuff does matter. I think there's so many socio-cultural, political issues where honestly people just seem to want to score points, right? They just want to score points. They want to get likes. They want to get retweets.
They want to go viral.
They want to, yeah. And, you know, I understand that tendency. I understand that urge for sure, especially as someone who's very prominent on social media now. But I often just think, okay, well, is this helpful? I feel like this about so many issues. It's one of my greatest criticisms of the entire Black Lives Matter movement, not just the organization, but the movement itself, right? I think it gives people a dopamine hit. It makes people feel good. It makes people feel holier than thou. It makes people feel like, I'm fighting the next civil rights movement. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And I'm like, how helpful is this? What tangible good has come from this? Are things getting better or are they getting worse? Right? Sure. I'd argue not just are they saying, I'd say stuff's getting worse since that, right? It's not helpful. Are the police actually being reformed and changed? Have they now got better training to reduce certain incidents happening? Or no,
have you accomplished anything? Yeah.
No, but people have accomplished the dopamine hit of, hey,
better.
I put the hashtag in my bio and I dunked on a conservative and I called that person racist and I did this and I did that, and they're getting their little dopamine hits. But I'm like, well, is it helpful? So I always come back and center myself on, okay, if I'm talking to someone, especially someone who has a different view from me on this issue, my personal goal is to nudge them in my direction, not through any manipulative tactic. But firstly, if they don't know the facts, be like, okay, did you know this? Did you know that? Do you know what this actually means? Do you know what's going on? Right? Give people the information. And I found by giving people true information, lo and behold, they usually shift in the pro-life direction.
Exactly.
Right. They shift, even if they don't go all the way.
They haven't had the education.
Yeah. You might get someone who's like, oh, well, I think it should be legal up until 30 weeks. And you're like, whoa, 30 weeks. Do you know what that even means? And they're like, oh yeah, that's an embryo. And you're like, bro, that's not right. And they might be like, oh, okay.Maybe you move them to 14 weeks or 12 weeks. Maybe you move them from 12 weeks to, you're moving them, you're moving the direction on any big, strongly held issue. You're typically not going to be able to just flip someone in a matter of minutes or a single conversation. But I think if we can, nudge people in a better direction and in a more honest and truthful direction, then I think the truth in itself is very powerful and tends to prevail in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when it comes to social media, because I notice, there's a lot of conservatives or pro-lifers even, or, leftists who kind of want that clickbait or do the thing for the likes or to go viral or whatever. And I think there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time to rally your base and get them fired up for something. And then there's a time where you are changing hearts and minds and where you do want to stay relevant so that you can influence people genuinely and really not just, get mad. I've done a little bit of both. I'll admit there's times where I'm fired up and I see something and I post something and I'm like, everybody's the devil over there. And then there's times where I'm like, hey, let's rally around this mom and help. And ironically, not a lot of people actually join me to help moms when we do that kind of stuff. But I guess I feel convicted when you say that because I've done that before too. But
by the way, let me tell you, Christine, with a lot of the stuff I'm saying, I'm not saying these things as if I myself am
No, I
immune to
know.
them
I
or never
know.
guilty of them, right? So much of what I say is like, look, this is just a human thing. This is a
Yes.
human thing. We
Yes.
all have these tendencies. If you've got a social media platform with a lot of followers, there's always a tendency to play to
Yeah.
your audience or be a little more harsh maybe than you need to, or to straw man
Which I am. I'm the
someone.
queen of
But
memes.
everybody does it. But I just
Yeah.
think that, if everyone can be mindful of it, right? It doesn't mean never, ever, ever engage in this stuff. But then I think, again, I think it would be helpful because I think that it would move things. It would actually move the needle more rather than just, if people already agree with you, it's not hard to, get them to agree with you more.
Yeah.
The hard part is reaching across the aisle a bit to people who are undecided, sitting on the fence. There's radicals who maybe you're never going to get to, right? I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I would say don't even waste time with that extreme 5% over there, right? But all those people in the middle who are undecided or just not thinking or haven't got the information, whatever. I'm like, oh wow, all those people are reachable and teachable. So let's try to shift them without any, and we can do it without propaganda, right? We don't need euphemisms. We don't need propaganda. We don't need to hide from the facts and hide from biology and hide from ethics and hide from morality and use all this manipulation and appeals to emotion. We can just be logical and reasonable and appeal to what I consider. I do think everybody has, unless you've spent many, many years of indoctrination trying to get rid of it, human beings do have an innate morality, right? People do have an innate moral pull. This is why this issue is even heated, right? If it were just the same as clipping a toenail or, getting a wart removed, it wouldn't even be an emotional issue, right? Why is it even a moral issue for a woman or a man involved in these situations? We know the weight of it, right? It has moral weight, and people do have a natural pull. I think society and culture is constantly trying to beat that morality out of us through propaganda, but it does innately exist, and you can see it in children. And I think that we need to appeal to that because people do have it even when they did not. I think sometimes people even pretend that they don't because they know that they do. So they actually, a lot of those extremists, I do think that they know that their position is messed up, but they almost are going so hard to try to cover up for the fact that they know, like they know it's like when someone is, I don't know, when you were a kid and maybe you have a friend who's doing something they know is wrong and they want to get other kids to do the wrong thing because then it makes them feel better, or it makes them feel like, oh, well, if other people are doing it, then it's not so wrong. And I think that there's a lot of that going on where it becomes this thing like, oh, well, other people are doing X, so therefore it's okay.
Yep. It kind of makes them feel okay in the decisions that they made. I notice a lot of people who are the most aggressive typically have had abortions or men, whether they pressured the woman or didn't have a say, because a lot of times women can go do this on their own, are affected by abortion. And that can play out in many different ways. It can become even more and more emotional when you've had a firsthand experience with something like this. But you bring up the heaviness of it, how it obviously is something that they know is wrong, and that's why they're trying to cover it up. I was watching one of your podcast episodes, specifically with Eden McCourt, which I actually was just introduced to her through your episode.
Oh, cool.
And I'm so glad that you introduced me to her. In that episode, you said that you've watched an abortion. Now, there are animated videos of abortions that people share to kind of explain what it is. I have seen real ones, which I'm assuming is kind of the same videos that you probably saw. When you watched those, what went through your mind?
Oh boy, it was horrifying, honestly. And that in itself says a lot. Because I could watch a video of any type of surgery and it might be bloody and like a little bit icky because, it is, but I wouldn't morally and ethically feel any type of revulsion, right? If I'm watching a video of an open heart surgery, I might be like, ooh, this is a bit graphic, but it doesn't tug at my morality and ethics. With this, I was just like, it's watching a murder video, right? It's watching a murder video of the most innocent, most defenseless, member of our species, right? And you clearly see it. You can see, the the hands, the arms, the face, the body, like, yeah. I'd seen images before of, the results of a dilation and, D&E surgical abortion. And, when you just see the baby all, ripped up and on a table or in a bucket or whatever. I've seen those images before, but actually seeing the video and seeing this child go from alive to dead at the hands of a so-called doctor, and then just think, wow, this is happening by the thousands, by the millions around the world annually. And this is what people are supporting and are wearing t-shirts for in some cases, and are out on social media and out on the street holding up signs, promoting and supporting. And I'm like, man, I wonder how they would feel if they watched this video, right? Just as you said, that a lot of people don't actually have the information. And I think that one of the major things with this is that nobody watches that video. And I don't recommend people watch those videos. But that's part of how people stay in the dark about it. That's how people stay in their cerebral cortex of kind of the human mind. If you're a fairly intelligent human, you can rationalize almost anything, right? You can intellectually rationalize and use, logic and reason to come to almost any conclusion, including some very, very heinous stuff. I'd actually say more intellectual people are actually more likely to do this and engage in this, because you can kind of rationalize anything. Oh, well, what about this? And what about that? And you can use all these mental tricks in order to get around something. But there's something very visceral and powerful about just seeing what you're actually talking about, right? Yeah. Let's not play with the language. Let's not talk about blastocysts and embryos and fetuses and, the different terms that we're all using to describe the same human being, right? Let's get away from the fluffy language. What is it that we are really talking about here? And when you watch that video, it's like, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. When you're saying all these phrases, when you're repeating slogans, this is what's really at stake here. This is at hand. And I don't think that anyone, regardless of their position, would be able to watch this. This is also why they don't like it when pro-life people show images and stuff like that, right? They don't want people to see that. It's why we don't want women to, have the 4D scans, or, even have ultrasounds at certain times, or hear the heartbeat or whatever. Cause this is an area where I would say, I'm largely a facts over feelings type of person, right? I'm more logically driven than emotionally driven in most things. But when it comes to human life, when it comes to children, when it comes to babies, there are times and places where the emotional side matters and is there for a very moral reason, right? If anybody, no matter someone's position, if you saw somebody be murdered in cold blood or be beaten up in cold blood, you have an emotional, visceral reaction to that. You're not sitting there logically like working out. It's like, this is wrong. Everyone knows it to be wrong. Everyone knows this is incorrect. This is an injustice. This is not right. This is not how human beings should be treated. This is not right. This is not fair. This is disgusting. We all have that within us. And I'd say that in our position, we're simply drawing that across our entire species, right? We're just drawing it from the beginning to the end. Most people draw it from, almost the beginning to the end, right? A little bit further along to maybe not quite to the end for some people, because now you've got people supporting euthanasia and whatever, and that's a whole other conversation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, most people, like everybody would be like, yeah, of course, murder is wrong. Like, what, human right? You don't even need to think of it, right? You're not logically sitting there like, okay, well, why is murder wrong, and so on. You could explain it, but actually, to be honest, there's probably quite a lot of people who couldn't, but they know, right? Implicitly that thing is wrong. So to me, the pro-life position, as I see it, is simply just taking that logic, taking that position, taking those morals, those ethics, and expanding it to everybody. There's always been a time in history where there's a part of humanity that's denied that, right? And every time there's a conversation at any point in history, in any place in history, where people are trying to draw a differentiation between a human being and a person, it's always in an attempt to justify slavery, brutalization, or genocide.
Yeah,
Always.
dehumanization.
When people are debating between trying to separate between a human being and a person, right? You'll hear people, oh, it's a human but not a person. The only time people do that is when they're trying to justify something heinous, and that in itself says a lot to me. And it's always existed. It's always existed. It's happened along racial lines. It's happened across religious or ethnic lines in the past, where people say, oh, those people they're not people. They're humans, but not people,
Yeah.
right? And even drawing a
Now it's
distinction in
happening.
the law. And we're still in that situation.
Yep.
But right now, that group of people is unborn babies. And based off of that, people are now able to rationalize the way that they are treated. And again, to do it in a very inconsistent manner. I'm sure, because people will still get mad at a pregnant woman if she drinks alcohol or does drugs or something like that. Why? Because it could harm the baby. And again, like I said, people go to baby showers, but not fetus showers. No, people are not even consistent with this. They're not consistent with it at all. It's, if the baby is wanted, then it's a baby. If it's not, then it's just a fetus or an embryo or a clump of cells, whatever. And again, if we're going to be remotely consistent and logical, that's not a tenable position. So for the people screaming, follow the science, let's actually follow the science.
Yeah, no, tons of great points there. And when it comes to the actual videos, I've seen them. I even went so far as to watch a real partial birth abortion, and I almost vomited. It was one of the most horrific things I have ever seen.
In person?
Not in person.
Okay.
If I was in person, I would have tried to save the baby. No, I mean, I would have tackled the doctor.
Yes, Christine.
Yeah, no, you're going down, buddy.
Christine aborted the doctor.
A video, yeah, I'm going to jail for that. When the abortionist should be going to jail, really. But I've watched the videos. I watched all of them. And I even made my husband watch them because I was like, I'm so passionate about this, especially because I was one of those women that is so thrown around in this debate of what's right and wrong and who they say they actually care about. And I've been in those shoes. So I feel very connected to these women in so many ways. And it's part of why I'm passionate. But also because of what actually happens in abortion. I made my husband watch it. And I was like, this is why I do what I do. Watch that. I mean, he couldn't stomach it either. It was just horrific. And if you feel like you can watch it, you can go Google them, and they're, you look up like medical abortion videos, and often they'll come up. But if you want to see an animated version, which still shows you basically the same thing, and I suggest anybody do it and have that as a resource. Our friends over at Live Action do have abortionprocedures.com, and that's an animated video where people can see how the different abortions are performed. And that's something that most people don't even know, that there's multiple types of abortions, not just one type of abortion. I know you have a lot of things to do, and it is a holiday week. It won't be a holiday week likely when this comes out, but it's a holiday week right now while we're filming. With every episode, I end with asking the same exact question. You are very outspoken on your beliefs. You're not afraid of controversy. You'll say, what it is you believe, and you do it in a very powerful way. For those who are maybe a little more timid than you, or a little more nervous on speaking out when it comes to their values and what they believe, what one piece of advice would you give them?
I'm going to give two.
Okay.
Number one is, you don't need to go full Zuby. You don't need to go as far as Christine does, perhaps. But we can all be 10%, 20%, 30% braver. If every single person who agrees with some of what we're saying were 10% or 20% more bold and outspoken, that in itself collectively would make a massive difference.
Yeah.
The other point I would say is, people who have the most, not just on this issue, but many others, I would say that some of the people who are pushing the most ridiculous, illogical, goofy, demonic, degenerate ideas in society are extraordinarily courageous and brave and outspoken. And you have better ideas than them. So if they can be, if my ideas were as goofy as theirs, I'd keep my mouth shut. I'd be afraid to say that stuff publicly that they're saying. And they're saying it. So if you have good ideas and you have better ideas and you have sane ideas, then say it. Say it. What are you afraid of? Like, why let the people with the worst ideas in society set the tone of the conversation and set the Overton window and influence all these young people and children and so on with their terrible, nonsensical, illogical ideas, right? And I'd also say that if you hide away, number one, the fight is going to come to your door, but also I would say that you're almost accepting some type of admission, I'd say, that there's something wrong with what you believe. And I think a lot of people are quietly doing this without knowing that they're doing it, right? If someone's afraid of saying what they think and afraid of saying their belief, it sends a signal that they know there's something wrong with their position, or that they don't think their position is correct. And that might not be how most people think of it. Most people are going to think just, I'm protecting myself, I'm protecting my family, I'm protecting my job, and so on. But you're subtly sending a signal that there's something wrong or shameful about what you believe. And that's why you're, kind of being marginalized and self-censoring in this manner. So those would be, I know that's not just one, those are multiple things, but having spoken to, thousands and thousands of people at this point, these are some of the things I've told them that have helped move the needle for them individually. But if you can just do 10%, 20% more, I'm not expecting to flip over and go from being completely quiet to speaking up and speaking out on absolutely everything. That's not realistic, and that's not going to happen. But you can certainly be 10%, 20% more, whether online, offline, within your community, in your family, in your college, in your workplace, wherever you are, whatever it is. If you see something that's wrong or out of order, then, voice what you're worried about.
That might be my favorite answer that I've gotten to that question. I ask it every single episode, and I think that one might be my favorite, especially the way you put it with 10%, 20%. We can all do a little bit more. Zuby, where can people who are, listening to this, like, I love this guy, I want to go follow him. Where can they find you?
So you can follow me on all social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music, or ZUBY Music for my American friends. And you can find me at teamzuby.com. My music and podcast are available on all the platforms. Just search my name, Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, and you will find me.
You guys go check him out. Follow him. You will not regret it. He's one of my favorite follows on Twitter. Zuby, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Christine. Appreciate it.